Welcome back to our holiday side dish series, episode number 4, where we're building out a festive, colorful Thanksgiving menu, one seasonal ingredient at a time. Over the last few weeks, we have done Brussels sprouts, sweet potatoes, and green beans, each with their own twist to make them feel a little fresher, a little more modern, and let's be honest, way more fun than your usual go-tos. And today, it's all about one of the coziest fall staples out there, squash. Now yes, roasted squash is amazing on its own, but in today's video, we're doing more than just slicing and seasoning. We're giving squash its moment to shine with 3 elegant, make-ahead-friendly recipes that are just as delicious as they're beautiful on the table. So whether you're hosting, bringing a dish to share, or just need something a little different from the usual lineup, this episode is for you. And we're kicking things off with one of my personal favorites, quinoa stuffed acorn squash. I first made this a few years ago when a friend brought her new boyfriend to our Thanksgiving dinner, and luck would have it, he was vegan, gluten-free, and didn't eat soy. And I know a lot of us have been there, right? Trying to make something that checks all the boxes without making it feel like a compromise. This dish did the trick, and to my surprise, it ended up being one of the first things to disappear from the table. It's filling enough to be a main for someone skipping the turkey, but it's also worked beautifully as a side dish for everyone else. And before you ask if you got a crew that doesn't love quinoa, no worries, I got an easy swap that will work just as well. We're using 4 large acorn squash, which will give us 8 halves, which I consider as 8 servings. And I'll be honest with you, cutting acorn squash can feel a little intimidating the first time because, let's face it, these things are round, tough, and not easier to cut. But here's what I do to make it easier. I trim a thin slice off at the top, just enough to create a flat surface. That way it doesn't roll around on the cutting board while we're trying to slice them. Then with the squash sitting stable, I cut them in half lengthwise. Once halved, we'll scoop out the seeds and stringy bits inside. You don't need to be too precious about it, just enough to make good room for the filling. Next, we'll shave a little sliver off the rounded bottoms of each half so they sit flat on the table and don't trip over once we stuff them. We'll then transfer those onto a sheet pan and start working on the seasoning. It is nothing fancy, just the classics. Into a bowl, we'll add 1/4 teaspoon of onion powder, 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder, half a teaspoon of ground cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon of ground cumin, half a teaspoon kosher salt, and 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. We'll stir them to combine and set aside. Then we'll brush the insides of each squash half with a little bit of olive oil. I use about 2 tablespoons of olive oil in total. Then we'll sprinkle each half with the seasoning we made earlier. Next, we'll arrange them cut side down on the sheet pan and pop them in a preheated 400-degree oven for 40 to 45 minutes until they're fork tender and slightly caramelized. Halfway through the roasting process, I like to rotate and flip the sheet pans to make sure they are roasting evenly. Now, if you're with me on this stage, congratulations. The hardest part of the recipe is done. The rest is quite straightforward. I usually make the filling while the squash is roasting, but you can also do it while it's cooling because it takes no more than, say, 15 to 20 minutes to make. In a large skillet, we'll heat a tablespoon of olive oil over medium heat and add a chopped medium onion along with 3 chopped stalks of celery. We'll saute them, stirring frequently until they're softened and translucent. That takes about 5 to 6 minutes. Then we'll add a diced apple and continue to stir, making sure that apples are softening for about 3 to 4 minutes. Now, as I was filming this video, I forgot to add the apples in this stage and had to add them later, which ended up being okay, but I think I still like the slightly sauteed apples better. Also, in case you're wondering, any apple would work here. I usually like Fuji apples, but Honeycrisp and Gala would also work beautifully. The important thing is to make sure that it is cut into small 1/2 inch pieces so they're not too big and we get a bit of an apple with each bite. Next, we'll stir in 2 cloves of garlic and saute for 30 seconds. At this point, all the veggies should be nicely soft and fragrant. If the celery is still crunchy though, cook it a little bit longer. Finally, we'll add in 2.5 cups of cooked quinoa, half a cup of chopped cranberries, half a cup of chopped pecans, 1 teaspoon of kosher salt, and half a teaspoon of black pepper. We'll give that a good stir and turn the heat down to medium-low and let it cook for 7 to 8 minutes, stirring occasionally and keeping a close eye on it to make sure that it is staying moist. If you feel like it's drying, add a tablespoon or 2 water so it stays moist. Now for assembly, I like to do it right on a serving platter so I can skip the step of having to transfer them later on. But of course, you can do it on the sheet pan as well. If you're with me, we'll transfer the roasted squash halves onto a large serving platter and fill each half with the filling all the way to the top. Pile it as high as you can so it looks nice and full. Then we'll sprinkle each squash with a handful of pomegranate seeds for a pop of color and some fresh parsley for added freshness. Now I use parsley, but some finely chopped sage or fresh thyme would also be nice. Now before we move on to the next recipe, let's address a few things. One of my favorite things about this recipe is how flexible it is. You can serve it warm, at room temperature, or even cold, which makes it perfect for prepping ahead. If this is going on in your holiday menu, you can roast the squash and make the filling a day or 2 in advance. Just let everything cool to room temperature. Then store the squash and quinoa mixture in separate airtight containers in the fridge. If this is going on your holiday menu, you can roast the squash and make the filling a day or 2 in advance. Just let everything cool completely, then store the squash and the quinoa mixture in separate airtight containers in the fridge. On the day off, all you have to do is assemble and garnish. Like I said, you can absolutely serve it cold, but what I usually do is turn off the oven after I take out the turkey and tuck all my sides inside to stay warm with the help of that gentle residual heat. Quinoa. I know I promised you a substitute at the beginning of this video because let's be real, not everyone loves quinoa. If that is the situation you're in, you can easily swap cooked wild rice with quinoa and still keep it gluten-free. The flavor profile will change, but the earthy and nutty flavors of wild rice would also work beautifully here. And if you're new to cooking wild rice, I have a detailed guide on my website, both for cooking it on the stovetop and in the Instant Pot. You can check those out. I have the links in the description. Moving on, our second recipe, roasted acorn squash salad, is colorful, festive, and the kind of dish that can also be a centerpiece on your holiday table. It is also one of those salads that looks like it took a ton of effort, but it's actually really easy to throw together. And it works beautifully alongside turkey or other rich mains because it is light, yet still hearty enough to stand on its own as a side dish. Again, we're using acorn squash here, but this time we're slicing the halves into 1-inch pieces. 2 small acorn squash is ideal here, which should give you about 12 to 14 slices. We'll transfer those slices onto a sheet pan lined with parchment paper and set that aside. In a medium bowl, we'll add 2 tablespoons of olive oil, 2 tablespoons of maple syrup, a pinch of cinnamon, half a teaspoon of kosher salt, and a pinch of black pepper. We'll give them a good mix and then brush each slice with the mixture on both sides. We'll pop them into a preheated 400-degree oven and roast them for 15 minutes. Then carefully flip them and roast for another 15 minutes until they're lightly browned. Meanwhile, we'll make a quick salad dressing. In a small measuring cup, we'll add a 1/4 cup of olive oil, 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar, 1 tablespoon of maple syrup, half a teaspoon of kosher salt, and a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. We'll give it a good whisk and set it aside. Now let's talk about the salad ingredients. I'm using a mixture of spring mix and arugula because I like the peppery flavors of arugula in my salads, but if all you have is spring mix, that'll work as well. And of course vice versa. I like to buy pre-washed mixed greens from the store as it makes it easier, but if you're washing them your own, make sure that the leaves are fully dry so that the dressing can coat and stick on them. So to assemble, we'll place 3 cups of spring mix and 2 cups of arugula in a large bowl, drizzle it with the dressing and give them a good toss. I think clean hands work best here, but a pair of kitchen tongs would also work. We'll then add a cup of cooked quinoa or whatever cooked grains you have on hand, like wild rice or farro, half a cup of dried cranberries, 1/4 cup of pomegranate seeds, and we'll toss that to combine. Now you can serve the salad in this big bowl, but since I like to showcase it, I will transfer it onto a large oval dish. Let's face it, it looks better that way. We'll top it off with roasted squash slices, garnish it with some crumbled goat cheese, and a handful of toasted pumpkin seeds. Like the first recipe, you can make each component of this recipe a day or two ahead, store them separately in airtight containers in the fridge, and assemble it all together right before serving. Our final recipe, butternut squash bruschetta, is a cozy little appetizer that is perfect for any fall gathering. But it is also a great way to use up leftover cranberry sauce and roasted butternut squash, perfect as a light lunch or a cozy snack the next day. Now, if you're making the cranberry sauce and roasting butternut squash cubes, I have the recipes on the blog, which I will link below. I make my cranberry sauce with a bit of maple syrup, and it works wonderfully in the recipe, but any cranberry sauce would work here. Also, while I'm using leftover roasted butternut squash, any leftover squash would work here. Just make sure that they're cut into half-inch cubes. Once you have those two components ready, the rest is quite easy to put together. We'll start with toasting a few slices of sourdough bread in a toaster oven. Meanwhile, we'll make a quick goat cheese spread. Into a bowl, we'll add 8 ounces of goat cheese, 2 tablespoons of heavy cream, 3 stalks of chopped scallion, a clove of minced garlic, and a quarter cup of chopped parsley. We'll give that a good stir to combine. Now, we want this to be at a spreadable consistency, so it helps when the goat cheese is at room temperature. If yours isn't, you can leave the mixture out a bit so it is softened. To assemble, we'll spread the toasted bread with 1 to 2 tablespoons of the goat cheese spread, followed by 1 to 2 tablespoons of cranberry sauce. We'll then top that off with some roasted squash cubes and sprinkle each slice with a handful of sliced almonds or any other nuts you have on hand. Finally, we'll drizzle each slice with some honey and sprinkle them with a pinch of sea salt. If you prefer, you can finish it off with a sprinkle of parsley or sage if you have it. If you're planning to serve this as an appetizer, you can make each component of the recipe a day or two ahead, store them in airtight containers in the fridge, and assemble right before serving. That wraps it up for me today. As always, you can find all these recipes on the blog. Links are down in the description. If you enjoyed this video and found a little holiday inspiration, give it a like and of course subscribe, because next week we're diving into another holiday classic, wild rice, and trust me, you'll want to have those on hand for your holiday menu planning. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video, where we're our final recipe, butternut squash. Butternut squash bruschetta is a cozy little appetite.